Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be talking about Exxon and why I think you have a decent entry here in a short-term trade and where I think the stock price could head over the next few months. So I wanted to start this video by talking about this long-term wave count we have here on the monthly time frame. We've had this 5-wave cycle higher here that started in the 90s, and it kind of topped out in about 2013. So ever since then, we've had this ABC wave move down, which is exactly what you'd get after a 5-wave cycle higher. And this stock has absolutely gotten destroyed for the past 5 years. So on a very long-term basis, I actually do think the stock is ready for another 5-wave cycle higher. Maybe something that looks like this, where you'd get a push back up to these previous pivots, then down, then break over those pivots, and then make new all-time highs. I think that's definitely possible here. But again, you'd probably be waiting about 10 years for this, so it's not really worth the wait. But as an extremely long-term position, I do think now's the time to take that position. I think you could take that position versus the recent lows, but there's not very much upside. Best case, you get a move to the 161.8% extension, which pretty much sits right at around 150 a share. So I don't know if, waiting 15 years for like 300% is worth it. If that's worth it to you, then you can take the position here as a long-term position, but on a short-term basis, I do think the stock has a great entry. So I do strongly believe this stock has bottomed because we've completed that ABC down. So on the daily time frame, I do think this also could be the start of a 5-wave trend higher. So we've got this first wave here, this second wave here that's been consolidating, and now you've got this tightening range down here, and I think any break over this trend line should give you a decent entry for a short-term trade. I think if you get a break over this downtrend line here, you could take a long position and then put your stop versus these recent consolidation lows. If that's this candle, then that would sit right at around 40 a share. Right now, the stock's kind of breaking below these pivots we have here. I think it's probable that the stock actually reverses higher here and breaks back above these pivots, and then you could put your risk versus the pivot. On a short-term basis, if we get a break over this trend line, I think the stock could see a move back to these breakdown pivots from back here. This sits right at around 65 a share. I think there's a high chance we see this. Usually when you break below a pivot, you'll get a back test before further slide. I believe this stock is bottom, so I actually believe we break back above these pivots, but when we do test these pivots, I do think it'll come into some pretty large supply and it'll consolidate out. So I think there's a good chance we get a move back up to this $65 area. That's also where this 161.8% extension sits, is right at 65.15. So it's right in line with those long-term pivots that we broke down from. Like I said, when you break down from a pivot, usually you're going to get a back test before further slide. So I do think it's very likely we do test this 65 area over the next few months. We've got that 161.8% extension there, and then those long-term pivots. So the way I'd go around trading this is if we do break over this trend line here and we do break back above these pivots, I think you can take a position at around 45, and then you can put your stop below 40 right here. You're risking about 5 points for potentially 20 points. And I think that offers a decent trade. This would be the third wave and a fifth wave higher. So I think we could come into this 161.8% extension, then come back down, and then potentially head above those pivots that we had. So if we do get a decent entry here, I'll probably take this trade if we break back over this trend line, and I'll probably trim half at around 61 at that 138.2% extension, and then I'll ride the rest to about 65. Now, if you're looking to take a long-term position, you might be waiting a long time for this stock to move significantly higher, but it does pay out a pretty hefty dividend, so you can collect those dividend payments. So you could totally take a position here against this pivot at about $30 a share. You're risking about 10 points for potentially over 100 points. So you've got over a 1 to 10 risk reward as a long-term trade here, but again, you might be waiting a long time. But as I said, I do think there's a decent setup here for a short-term trade, and we could potentially see this 65 area again to backtest this pivot breakdown we had back here. Anyways, yeah, that's kind of my views on XM. I think we're about to get a pretty decent entry here. If we end up breaking back over this trend line, you can then put your stop versus these lows here, and we should get a significant move higher to retest these pivots. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and make sure you subscribe and leave a like.